So good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, a good friend to Jenaly, Jonathan Garber, the master of disaster, known as by that moniker for his expertise in security and business continuity. He does a fabulous blog on business continuity and disaster recovery. And Jonathan is also the cloud computing expert for TOGL Cloud. And while I had hoped I could get him here in person, TOGL Cloud's just coming off a fantastic industry event, and Jonathan's time is prized, so he was gracious enough to at least be here virtually, which, hey, we're kind of leveraging the cloud anyway this way. So,
Exactly.
John, thanks so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. I asked the attendees here today a bunch of different questions about cloud, what they're most interested in, and I thought we'd key in on a couple of the high points and take advantage of your expertise. So, from your
MJ, let me just say hi to everybody in Portsmouth. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. Next time I'm gonna definitely try. And MJ, thanks for bringing me on board to help talk about my favorite subject.
Great, thank you. So let's start with, for a typical small business, what will cloud computing do for them that they can't already do with their current IT setup? And for your information, most of the people in this room, at least the Jenaly clients that are here, most of them have on-premise servers, one or several servers running the typical, it's a typical small business infrastructure. So without getting into the technobabble, what will cloud computing do for folks like this that they might not be able to do with what they have now?
That's a really great question. I mean, because that's kind of at the core of the cloud question, the old radio station, WIFM. What's in it for me? If people are traditionally on a traditional customer premise solution, then we've got all of our eggs in one basket, which is their office. And maybe it's one server, maybe it's two servers, maybe they started with one and then they kind of migrated to another one but held on to the old server, doing some legacy tasks. What is cloud going to do for them? Well, number one, it's going to give them a fresh infrastructure, and it's always fresh. A good cloud computing platform is refreshing their hardware every 18 to 20 months. How many of your clients are changing out their server platform every 18 to 20 months?
Right, good point.
Not many. Right. Most of them are probably holding on to it 4 years, maybe even 5 years, and that's a whole other conversation because they're actually losing money by holding on to the technology for too long. So one thing they're going to get is they're going to get a fresh, high-performance infrastructure, and they're going to get it kept fresh on a regular basis. That's probably half of the typical refresh interval for a customer premise solution, at least as we've seen historically in our market. I don't think it's really any different than New Hampshire. That's number one. Number two, they're going to get mobility. And this is really at the core of cloud. Every good cloud solution has mobility, as we say, baked in. Mobility means that I could access all my vital data systems, not just email, which is pretty slick, but all my vital data systems from home, on the road, from look what I got over here. Got an iPad or an Android, even a phone, a smartphone. I've done it with my old Android phone, now an iPhone. So if I can access all of these vital data systems from the field, from home, from the road, what does that mean to your operation? Now think about that for a second. Once I'm not tied to a physical office, what does it mean to your sales force, for example? Because ask yourself, are their sales sitting and waiting to come to the office, or are they out on the street where the clients are? And so if I could kick my salespeople out and have them out visiting more salespeople, but reporting and accessing data live, what does that mean to the operation? If someone has a child who's sick and they have to stay home with them from school that day, which is also better than them bringing the sick child to the office, but they can continue to work. There's no sick time involved. There's no lost productivity. What does that mean to the operation? Somebody goes out on maternity leave. After nobody wants to replace somebody who goes out on maternity leave. It's very expensive. That person has a lot of knowledge of the business wrapped up. What do they do after a couple of weeks of staying home? They would probably like to work and earn some money, and you are desperate to have them working for you again. Mobility allows that to happen. Travel, vacation, the bottom line with mobility, here's all you have to remember. Gartner found that when you enable employees, empower them with mobility solutions, you get a 33% bump in productivity. Wow. So what does that mean to your business to have a 33% bump in productivity? Think about that. You could discuss that later. The last thing that we're going to get, and this is huge. Now, I'm down in South Florida. I'm in Hurricane Alley. I'm getting ready for hurricane season. Business continuity. I'm not talking about backup, and I'm not talking about disaster recovery. I'm talking about true continuity. That means no matter what happens to your physical premise business, we can continue delivering those data systems through a secure portal to users wherever they end up. That means when your competition is out of business, you're still in business. When other people are filing business interruption claims, you're still doing business and possibly picking up their sales. So business continuity and mobility are among the two highest driving factors we have in people deciding to migrate to a cloud platform. Does that make sense?
It does. That was a great explanation. Thank you. And definitely some points that I'm sure we'll talk about more in the Q&A toward the end of the presentation. So probably one of the biggest questions that people ask is, what about security, compliance, encryption? Everybody's worried about, if my data is not in my office anymore, if I don't have control anymore. Is it safe? Is it secure? Is it okay?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you something funny about that. As you know, I've helped a lot of companies get their business enabled by the cloud. Yeah. Okay, from one way or the other, I've helped a lot of businesses over the past 8 years or so get enabled and empowered by the cloud to get all the benefits we talked about. 100% of them always ask about security and compliance. So it's a great question. Everybody, 100% of the people ask about security. It's a great question. The question you have to start with is, how secure is it in your office? Because most of the companies that we come into when they're looking for a migration, they're coming to us, their security stinks. Now, most Jenaly clients probably have a good enterprise class firewall. They've got backup. They've got these things in place. That's okay.
Yep.
But most clients that we start that aren't clients of ours, prospects we walk into, their security is terrible. They don't meet their legal compliance standards. Let's talk HIPAA, Gramley-Bliley, Sarbanes-Oxley, FINRA. Other than some FINRA shops, I have never walked into a shop that was supposed to be HIPAA compliant that was actually HIPAA compliant on the data side. Never. So whatever I do is typically a 100% increase in security. But let's dig into that a little deeper. There's two ways to look at security. So let me separate it for you so you could visualize it. One is physical security. The physical security of the asset data sits on. The other one we're really going to call data integrity. And data integrity is normally what you think of security when we talk about things like encryption and backup and availability. So can we okay to separate those two under the umbrella of security? Let's talk about physical security for a second. A good cloud platform like the ones we deploy are housed in a secure data center. Another word for data center is a co-location center. Between you and me, they're called bunkers. They're data bunkers. Everybody understands the concept of a bunker. These are Type 1 Class A bunkers. They're concrete buildings that you would love to be in during the next Hurricane Irene. Yeah. And they have no windows. We're talking biometric access, armed security guard. That's better than your office already. They are built to withstand anywhere from 150 to 200 mile-an-hour winds. We have redundant power systems and generators, redundant fiber optic internet feeds from separate cardinal points buried. We have redundant cooling, and we have built-in fire suppression. Now, that's the physical security. Is that better or worse than your office now? Because if that's worse than your office now, then maybe cloud isn't right for you and we should go move into your building. I've never met a client except for one bank that came close to that. And so moving into a data center gets all of those features for you at no capital outlay. You don't actually pay for any of that. That's just built into the fact that your cloud is housed there. So that's physical security. Are we square on that?
Yep. I think that was a great definition.
People got to understand that most civilians have never been in a commercial data center. It's a great place to take clients and do a lunch and learn there so they could get a tour and see what you get when you go into one of these data bunkers. It's fascinating stuff. It's like you see in movies about government installations with handprint readers and iris scanners and armed guards. Phenomenal security, phenomenal protection from the elements. Well, let's talk about the data itself. All data on our cloud platforms is protected by an Active Directory encryption standard. So we've got all the Active Directory security protocols from Microsoft, the passwords, the password policies. We've got all that folder control. We've got Active Directory. But then you're accessing it all of a sudden from your office to the cloud, typically through a 256-bit military-grade encrypted pipeline. That's a lot better than you're doing right now. So we're bumping up that security. Those firewalls over on the cloud side have multiple layers of redundancy. We typically have several of them. So we have fault tolerance. How many could die before we lose a connection? So we've got secure encrypted pipeline. Most people don't have that in their office today. 256-bit military-grade encryption, never been beaten. If you're just a mobile user and you're accessing the cloud, I don't care if this is a laptop or your home computer or somebody's borrowed computer, that's a 128-bit military-grade encryption on top of all the encryption and security that we build in to the cloud server platform. None of my clients with customer premise solution have those redundant layers. We call it a castle-type defense. It's like an onion, cascading layers of defense that create the entire security picture. So typically, everybody that we have migrated to the cloud saw a logarithmic increase in the amount of security features that were built in and available to their data when they made that move.
That's great. Thank you for that. That was a wonderful definition. So one of the other things I wanted to touch on just briefly, and I want to acknowledge one of our attendees here. We have Sarah Brown with us, who's the executive director of a business group up here called the Green Alliance that we're a member of. And
Super.
The Green Alliance is a sustainable organization of businesses that are trying to lower the collective carbon footprint and be environmentally responsible and sustainable. So how does cloud support that?
That's a really great question, Sarah. Thanks for asking that, and thanks for your interest, and thanks for your work with the Green Alliance. Cloud computing, I used to say a couple years ago, was the way of the future, but the way that the adoption rate that we have here in our market, it's the way of now. And even though it's a difficult economic time, when you ask people, do you still value in the environment in your choices, in your business choices? Everyone always says yes. And I say, well then, let's talk about cloud computing as the best green business technology you can have. And here's why. It's like, Sarah, the carpooling of computing. Traditional computing, is actually pretty dirty. There's a lot of physical components drawing a lot of power at all of these customer sites. So everybody in the room has the same computing setup multiplied over and over again in their offices, right? So just look around the room. You've got all these people with almost identical computer setups, and they're all drawing power and giving off heat. And when they give off heat, we have to run more air conditioning to cool them down, which uses more fossil fuels traditionally. So that's pretty bad. Now, when those computers all reach end of life, what happens, Sarah? We got to dispose of them. And they have lead, and they have mercury, and they have all PCBs all on the board. So we've got all these things. Now we have something that's near toxic waste that we have to dispose of properly and keep out of a landfill. That's the traditional model, the customer premise model. It's actually quite dirty and inefficient. Now let's look at cloud computing and figure out why that's green. It's green because I said it's like carpooling. Everybody in the room could be sharing the same platform and still getting the same or better performance than they had from the customer premise equipment. So we're sharing it. Sharing always saves resources. We're sharing the physical resources of the server. We're sharing the cooling systems, the lighting, the power, the internet. We're sharing all of that, and yet we're all separated securely within that platform, so we have the security and data integrity that we talked about. That's super green. And when we do a life cycle change, it's a fractional life cycle change compared to multiplying it by the number of people you have in the room right now. So That's one neat thing that I think makes cloud computing the greenest technology out there. Let me give you a flip side that most people don't realize. We save gas. Here's why. When we enable people with cloud computing, they work where they are. We say under cloud computing, work is something you do, not a place you go. And so when you look at some of these stultifying commutes that people have, just to get to an office, so they could sit behind a keyboard and talk on a phone, I go, whoa, where's the business? Where's the client? The client is out there. So you're saying I have to drive to the office so I could do my email, so I could do an expense report, so I could enter an order, and then drive to a meeting, then drive back to the office, then drive home? Wait a minute. Is there a better way? If I were enabled with cloud computing and I had the mobility, could I start off my morning at the table, do that email, enter in an order, access all of my back-end systems through any device, I don't care if it's a laptop or a tablet, then go straight to my first meeting, then go to my next meeting. Then I might loop around and go to the office, or guess what? Never go to the office that day, but get more work done, drive more revenue to the bottom line. Look, when you look at congested markets, let's look a little bit south of you guys at Boston. How much time is spent sitting on the road trying to get into Boston that produces no revenue, but tons of CO2, tons of emissions from cars sitting in traffic, which is the worst pollution effort you can have, is not moving in traffic or running the engine. We can take that whole model and turn it upside down. Ask people to focus on, go straight to where the business is. Do it where you are. You don't have to come to the office until you need to come to the office, and that's typically to have a meeting. So when we look at those levels of green, I'm telling you that in my experience, and we've measured this, cloud computing has been the greenest business technology to come along since, I don't know, putting in LED light bulbs and fluorescents. We're measuring significant power usage drops in people's offices. Normally, they're running air conditioning over a weekend just to keep the servers cool, and there's nobody in the office. So it's a big, big power saver, which makes it a big money saver, and it's a gas saver for your employees, whether they're typically mobile or not. I think it's a green winner all the way around, Sarah. What do you think?
That's great. Thanks, John. So the other thing, I mean, you're down in beautiful South Florida. Well, one of the unique things about us up here in New England is we are fiscally frugal, to put it mildly. So one of the big questions that always comes up is, how can the cloud help with small business technology costs? You know, what would the cost savings and benefits be in relation to migrating to the cloud, both in the long term and the short term? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really great question, and I'm glad that the person is asking about the short term and the long term. You always have to be asking about these things long term, because we're always looking for a long-term strategic play. I always tell prospects, people looking into working with us, let's not talk about next quarter. Let's talk about 2015. Where do you want to be 3 years from now? Are you opening up more offices? What is this business going to look like 3 years from now? Because I'm going to ask them for an investment. There is no IT or technology that doesn't require an investment. Whether it's your customer premise solution and the maintenance that goes with that, or we go to a cloud solution. You've got to invest money. The key is, can you strategize an investment that today is actually paying for itself or paying off 3 years from now? That's what a good strategic partner will bring to the table. So let's talk about short-term and long-term. Most people are looking at the cloud when it's time to make some kind of change. Let's stop and go back to a traditional model. In the traditional model, let's say you're a brand new startup company. All right, we're going to start with the green field. What do we need? We need at least a server, and we need to deploy it. We need a lot of Microsoft licenses. We got to load your line of business application, right? So we need Exchange. We need Microsoft Office. We need workstations. Traditional Office. Small startup typically will finance that for 3 years. Nobody finances technology more than 3 years. So here's what it looks like. You lease it. MJ installs it. You pay interest. You deduct the interest. You depreciate it 15 cents on the dollar for 3 years. What does the leasing company say it's worth at the end of the term? $1. That's why it's called a dollar buyout. Because at the end, it's only worth $1. 3-year-old servers are worth nothing. Charities don't even want them. So the traditional model is buy a bunch of technology, put it on customer premise, lease it, depreciate it, 15 cents on the dollar. You got 45 cents back, right? And then start all over again. Meanwhile, every year you had a lot of different little license renewals, and about every 18 to 20 months, Microsoft thought you should rebuy a bunch of licenses like the new Exchange, and the new SQL, and the new Office. Does that sound familiar?
Very.
All right. Here's one way it's worse. Day one, buy a bunch of equipment, lease it, pay interest, deduct the interest. That's just getting your money back. Depreciate it 15 cents on the dollar, and at 3 years when the lease is up, do nothing. Wait. Wait 4 years. It's lasted 4 years. Let's hold it another year. And here's what I want to tell you. If you do that, you're actually holding your business back, because the technology world passed you by. You're probably 2 or 3 versions behind on almost everything from Microsoft. The operating system, the applications, Exchange. Nobody upgrades a 3-year-old server. That's a terrible idea. And your line of business app typically is going to be requiring a newer operating system. Can you change out the operating system on a 3-year-old, a 4 or 5-year-old server? No. And the other thing is all the technology got faster and faster and faster. And your employees are banging their heads against the performance that you paid for 5 years ago. So the only thing worse than buying customer prem equipment is buying it and not buying new stuff every 3 years. So when we move to the cloud, we make a lot of that go away. You don't have to buy anything. And you could keep as many old desktops. Hell, employees could bring their own devices. They want to bring their own MacBook Air or an Ultrabook or an iPad or a tablet. Bring it. Use it. Use it from anywhere. If you want to go home and work for me, work. If you want to be on holiday and work for me, vacation, knock yourself out. You bought the device, I'll enable you to use it through the cloud. So we're going to get rid of all the CapEx. We're going to get rid of buying all those Microsoft licenses the first time and over again. We're going to get rid of all the items that die in a server that then become out of warranty. Remember this about a server. It's made up of a bunch of wear items. They're like tires on a car. You don't get emotionally attached to them. Everything in a computer dies. When you're out of warranty, it's on your head. When you're in warranty, it still costs you downtime. So there's no bargain there. So if all of that makes sense, and we make all of that go away with a cloud system, here's what we get. We get all Microsoft licensing that's always fresh and everybody's matches. So we don't have to convert Susie's Excel document from the old version to the new version. I send it back to her, she can't open it. We get rid of that. We get everybody in the same version of Exchange, sharing folders, sharing calendars, which is a huge productivity booster, just to be able to share calendars with your coworkers. We're always on the latest version of things like SQL. We always know that we have the horsepower to change your line of business application and keep that up with the latest operating systems. We get rid of all these spiky cycles of buy, depreciate, rebuy, or buy, depreciate, and don't buy. That's a big problem. All of a sudden, we multiply the devices that a single user can use without actually paying any more money. So if we provision an employee with a desktop, and they want to walk around with their laptop or their tablet or their smartphone, in other words, they want to bring technology to the table and use it because it suits them, and they are productive with it, cloud, we empower all of that. You know, it's a funny thing. One of the biggest costs, and one of the biggest cost savings that users experience with cloud, this freaked me out because I thought everybody would go for it for business continuity, was Microsoft licensing.
Huh.
You know, I'm in Hurricane Alley, and I thought everybody would jump on this before hurricane season. And people jumped on it. When I asked them what was the straw that broke the camel's back, what was the one tipping point, they all said the repeated cost of Microsoft licensing, buying it and rebuying it. We met with a company yesterday, MJ, that had 60 users spread out over 7 offices. They were on Office 2003. They found out that to just buy the new Office for everybody so they match was $18,000.
Yeah.
And about 20 months from now, Microsoft wants them to buy it again. And it hit me. That's why Bill Gates is a billionaire, and you're not, and I'm not. But we're going to beat that system because on the cloud, all of the licensing, all the Microsoft products that you can imagine, even really expensive ones like Visio and Dynamics and SharePoint, we build them in per person per month. We scale up, we scale down. Here's the other short-term and long-term cost benefit of cloud. Remember, at the beginning we said we're going to put it on a fault-tolerant, high-availability platform. You guys can discuss that a little more in depth, but basically, it's a lot of depth. That means we can absorb a lot of failure before we lose a connection or lose any computing. It's a really multi-million-dollar platform that you would be on.
Yeah.
So if we're kind of on that kind of platform, high-availability, fault-tolerant, in that bunker we talked about, and I could save your organization by going onto the cloud 1 day of downtime a year because of either a natural disaster, a power outage, or a catastrophic system failure of your servers. Just 1 day a year. What would that mean to your operation? Most people down here, when we get into that discussion, they figure out that they usually have about 3 to 4 days of downtime a year from power outages, in your case, ice storms, whatever, Hurricane Irene, who expected that? They have all kinds of reasons why they get a couple days of power interruptions and other things. I said, what did that cost the operation? Well, we had to send the employees home. Did you still make payroll? Yeah, they had to make payroll. You have to. You can't, you know. What did that mean to the operation? What did it mean to your relationships with your customers and your vendors when you were off for 2 days and they didn't know what was going on? What did it mean to your competition when you were down for 2 days and they weren't? What? So when we look at a kind of a TCO or cost benefit, we have to look at it's kind of a gut punch. What does it mean if I could eliminate all of those downtime days because we're in a cloud platform? And that no matter what happens to your office, you can continue to access those vital data systems from anywhere and any device. That's the long and short-term benefit in the big picture.
Great.
I hope that answers the question.
I think it did, and I think you painted a great picture. So, listen, you have been incredibly generous with your time. So I don't want to chew up too much more, but you know, maybe in 5 minutes or so, let's try and wrap this up. And you know, two other questions that I thought were really great were, when does it make sense for a company to move to the cloud, and if they don't move to the cloud, are they being left behind? And then, what should a small business look for in a cloud partner? Maybe we could just try and wrap it up with those 2 points.
They're two great questions. Most clients come to us when they're at a transition point. And here are some of those transition points, and you guys can, in the room, discuss where you are. Their server equipment reaches end of life. Now, let me help you out. A server's lifespan is 3 years. So if your server is 37 months or more in age, you've reached end of life. It's time, you're at a transition point to look at cloud computing. Perfect time to look at it. If you're looking at a major upgrade for any kind of line of business software, whatever your major ERP package or practice management or EMR package is, if you're looking at an upgrade, and that upgrade is going to require an upgrade in your server platform, don't do it. Look at the cloud, get an assessment with MJ as to whether that application will be compatible with the cloud, because in the long run, that will save you a lot of money in continuous upgrades. The last place where I go, the last 2 transitions I see where people are ready to move to a cloud, they open up another location. As soon as we need mobility and remote access, the cloud is a no-brainer. It's built in. And the last major transition is the day after you've had a major downtime event in your office, and you never want to go through that again. So if you had, in this past year, a couple of days where you were down or your data systems were unavailable, whether it was a system failure or a natural disaster or utility failure, that's the time to start talking about a cloud transition. Those fair enough?
That's great. And then, so just lastly, what about, who's a good, what should a company look for in a cloud partner, cloud provider? And we'll wrap it with that.
That's an interesting question, and it's a tough question because there's a lot of people out there talking cloud, and there's a lot of very big names that are talking about cloud. Microsoft and Google has Google Apps, and Amazon has something. And I have never found any of them that actually have a value sticking point for the small business, which is my typical market. I think yours as well is somewhere around 100 or 50 seats or less. There's just not enough in there for them. There's no flexibility. Remember, Microsoft is will only support Microsoft applications. So if you've got QuickBooks, or you've got Peachtree, you've got Mass 90, or you have a legal practice application, not for you. Google, a great company, but they put you in a box of compatibility that's incompatible with anything else. That doesn't work. Amazon gives you a IP address and space, and it requires an engineering department to take any advantage of that, and then they charge you for throughput, so it's never easy to predict what your bill is going to be. So what you want to look for is somebody that's got a local partnership, not a service out of you don't know where, but someone who can sit across the table from you, spend some time to understand your business needs, understand your business applications, and create a path for you to get as painlessly as possible to the cloud and support you face to face. Because at some point, the users have to be held by the hand to take advantage of this technology. So you want to look for local expertise. You want to look for a cloud platform that's got a super easy interface. That interface is going to make the difference between adoption and rejection by your users. So you want to find an interface that's got almost like a mini intranet built in. People could go there from any device and see your daily announcements, see your group folders, see everything right there on your portal. So you want to look for good interface that's got a good back-end engine that's going to maximize bandwidth, particularly mobile bandwidth like Wi-Fi and cellular. So the interface and the back-end engine. I happen to prefer anything that's being driven by Citrix. It's what we use on our cloud platforms. It reduces the bandwidth consumption down to 30K a user, and the printing is fantastic, so it solves those problems. The other thing to look for is make sure that they have a platform that has two things: fault tolerance and high availability. And what that means is how much of an individual component could die and the component still run, and then how many components could die and this thing still run without losing any of your data, without losing a connection to you. The cloud that we use, the cloud that MJ uses, the TOGL Cloud product, meets all of those standards. It's why we built it specifically to meet those needs, and it answers all of those. You've got local support, you've got a strong platform, you've got a strong engine, and you have the high availability and the fault tolerance, and you get all of your licenses included. That's another big driving factor. If someone says, here's a great blank server, an IP address and space, go take advantage of it. How do we engineer it? How do we get remote access? Where do the Microsoft licenses come from? Where do the Citrix licenses come from? And then who supports it and helps me? You answer those questions, you'll find a good cloud provider with those factors.
Great. Jonathan, I can't thank you enough again. I learn something from you every time I listen or talk to you. So thanks for sharing your time with us today. I really appreciate it, and we'll get you here the next time.
Outstanding. Thanks to everybody there who's taking the time and investing a little time to really learn about cloud and what it could do for your business. If you have any more questions, MJ, just give me a call.
Thanks so much. Take care.